On behalf of the Ukrainian people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire United Kingdom and the Commonwealth over this irreparable loss. The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who met the Queen in more peaceful times, offered his condolences, saying she'd enjoyed the love and respect of her subjects and authority on the world stage. She was dubbed by one of her biographers as Queen of the World, visiting hundreds of countries throughout her reign. She was monarch of 15 separate realms, the head of a commonwealth of some 56 nations. So there was no surprise that news of the Queen's death made headlines around the world.
Königin Elisabeth II. Ist tot. Das teilte der Buckingham Palast in London mit.
Tonight at the White House, the flags were at half-mast. Throughout her reign, the Queen was a living embodiment of the transatlantic relationship, meeting no fewer than 12 US presidents. In a statement, President Biden described her as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. Barack Obama said she had reigned with grace, elegance and a tireless work ethic, views echoed on the streets of Washington.
I admire her greatly. Yeah, I'm so sorry that she's passed. I mean, she's an icon here, everywhere.
Horrible. I've been reading about her my whole life. She's one of the sane people in the UK, like the US, and that's just sad.
As head of the Commonwealth throughout her reign, the Queen nurtured and shaped a unique international organisation whose leaders, past and present, relied on her wisdom and judgment.
The last days of the Queen's life captures who she was in so many ways, working till the very end on behalf of the people she loved. And that is why I'm sure that we will receive the news of her passing with both emotions of deep sadness, but also gratitude for a life that was utterly and completely devoted to the service of others.
And it was to a meeting of Commonwealth leaders that the Queen made her last overseas tour in 2015, visiting Malta, an island she'd once called home, the bookend of a life of duty and diplomacy on the international stage. James Landell, BBC News.
We can now speak to our correspondent Phil Mercer, who is in Sydney for us. Phil, we were hearing earlier in the early hours of the morning, that people were exchanging the news in Australia on their morning commute, because of course this news of the Queen's death broke in the very early hours of the morning there.
That's right. Millions of Australians would have woken up on Friday morning with news coming from Balmoral on the other side of the world in Scotland. Queen Elizabeth II had a deep affinity, a deep affection for Australia. She came here 16 times. The first of those visits came in 1954, and it was a marathon tour over 58 days. She visited 57 towns and cities, and I think it's that sort of stamina, that sort of devotion to duty that really impressed Australians, and that popularity and respect endured for many, many decades. Worth noting too that in that 1954 tour, it's estimated that 70% of the Australian population came out to see the young Queen, and certainly, as we say, that popularity has endured. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying in the last few hours that Queen Elizabeth II had a timeless decency and an enduring sense of calm. So a sense of dismay, sadness and shock being felt, not just here in Australia but across the Tasman Sea in New Zealand and right around the Commonwealth.
Indeed so, Phil. We will go here in the UK into an extended period of national mourning. How will it be recognised there in Australia?
There'll be a period of national mourning here too. We understand that later today there will be a gun salute at Federal Parliament in Canberra, one round for every year of the Queen's life. We also understand that following the state funeral in the United Kingdom, there will be a national memorial here in Australia too. And later today, the Governor-General, he was the Queen's representative in this country, given that Australia is a constitutional monarchy monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II was Australia's Queen. She was the head of state here, and the Governor-General, David Hurley, is to give a national televised address in a few hours' time. So this is certainly a historic day for Australia, a historic day for many people around the world, and the Governor-General to address Australia, to give them and us his thoughts on this historic and very, very sad day.
There is a period of adjustment for all of us now, Phil, particularly so here in the UK. She is everywhere. She's on our stamps, she's on our coins, her initials are on some of our post boxes, and of course then we have to get used to changing our national anthem, and I imagine in some respects it's similar in Australia.
It is, and those 16 visits that the Queen made to Australia have left an indelible mark. She came here for big sporting events, the Commonwealth Games, for example. Just in the harbour, on the other side of the harbour here, is the Sydney Opera House. She came here in 1973 to open what still remains one of Australia's most famous landmarks. So she has left an indelible mark on this country. There is absolutely no question of that, and the vast majority of Australians know no other monarch in their lifetime. So a period of adjustment in the United Kingdom, and certainly a period of adjustment here in Australia too.
Phil Mercer in Sydney, thank you very much indeed. It is extraordinary, isn't it, in this time of the internet and in times of global travel, that we think of 1953 when the Queen, just weeks after her coronation here in the UK, set off on this world tour, heading to Australia and also to New Zealand. And a little earlier I spoke to Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I asked her what the reaction is likely to be from the people there.
I think overwhelmingly the reaction is one of great sadness. The Queen was very much respected in New Zealand. She visited here a number of times during her long reign. Her coronation tours brought her to New Zealand for Christmas, New Year, 1953-54, for example, and she kept coming. Huge respect for her, and I think that the sadness you see expressed in the United Kingdom today will be mirrored here in New Zealand, where so many of us trace our roots back to the United Kingdom as well.
Another Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, said she was thoughtful, wise, curious, helpful. Was she helpful to Prime Ministers of New Zealand? Do you have personal memories?
I have a lot of personal memories of meeting with the Queen. The last substantive meeting I had with her as PM was when I came to Windsor Castle, where she hosted the most beautiful memorial service for Sir Edmund Hillary, who was a Knight of the Garter. And the Garter, of course, is returned after someone passes away. Now, remember also that Sir Edmund Hillary's ascent of Everest happened when the Queen was a very young Queen. And this was also seen as a high point for the British Commonwealth family, that a citizen of the Commonwealth had with his Sherpa, Tenzing Norgay, got to the very top of Everest. So lots of special memories from that occasion and many others.
She had such a deep well of experience because her reign spanned such a large arc of history. Did you find that useful? Was it without prying into the conversations that you had with her, was it that experience that she was able to share that became helpful?
Yes, over the Queen's very long life, she met leaders, personalities from around the world. You could raise with the Queen any place on earth, and she'd either been there, or she met the leader, or she knew something about it. And this wasn't just an issue of having official briefs. She had that lifetime of knowledge accumulated from watching the issues and being engaged with people and visiting places. So she was like a walking encyclopedia, if you like, of people, places and events.
You mentioned the visit in 1953. It's extraordinary to think back, isn't it, that the United Kingdom had just had a coronation for its Queen, and then she disappeared to the other side of the world. for 6 months. I mean, these days we travel so freely, and we live in the age of the internet, but back then, your Queen disappearing to the other side of the world, and she stayed in New Zealand for almost a month. That, if there was a high point in New Zealand royalty, it must have been that moment.
Yes, and also at that time, there was a terrible tragedy on Christmas Eve when the main express train from the capital, Wellington, to Auckland went into a river after a volcanic event had taken out a railway bridge, and the Queen was here for that. So she was part of that national mourning for dozens and dozens of people who died in that terrible tragedy. So people always remember her kindness at that time as well.
Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Emma Simpson is with me. 70 years. Here's a quote from the night of her coronation. "Throughout all of my life and with all of my heart, I will strive to be worthy of your service." And I think that, Emma, epitomised the humility that she displayed throughout her reign. It was extraordinary to so many people that she was both monarch and yet at the same time so familiar.
Absolutely, and I think we are now at a watershed moment for the nation. Britain is now in mourning, and it's such a huge loss. It's really still sinking in, and a moment of profound change for the country. And of course, it's not a surprise given her age and her failing health, but it's still a shock because she's been this constant, reassuring presence for so long, as you say, spanning 8 decades. And I think many will find it hard to believe that just a couple of days ago, there she was at Balmoral, seeing in the new PM, looking frail, but still smiling, on her feet, working right to the end. And now that reign is over. And I think there's just this overwhelming feeling of sadness.
Yes, indeed so. And we have a new king. King Charles III, the crown passes invisibly, imperceptibly to him. Camilla will be the Queen Consort, and he will lead this national period of mourning, this extended period of mourning. A state funeral expected in 10 days' time, the first full state funeral that we've had since Winston Churchill died in 1965. You're watching BBC News. So, Anna, we've opted away our viewers from PBS. Let's just continue thinking about the days ahead. We don't want to go too far, but there will be people waking up this morning here in Britain wondering what happens next. So maybe you could just bring us some of those details.
Well, as you can imagine, there have been very detailed, long-established plans that have been tweaked over the years but are now being enacted. So we expect the Queen's coffin to make the journey to London over the next few days, perhaps with some ceremonial events in Scotland on the way. We know that she will lie in state at Westminster before a state funeral, and those final preparations are now underway, as well, of course, as the transition to the reign of King Charles. Now, he will travel today, Friday, down to London with the Queen Consort, and at some point he's going to have an audience with the new Prime Minister, and we also expect him to address the nation. We don't know the precise details or the timings, but expect all these events to be very carefully choreographed, and we also anticipate a number of gun salutes to be fired, church bells to ring, and of course, meanwhile, some big events are being called off as a mark of respect. So Friday's prom at the Royal Albert Hall, that's been cancelled, as is the big last night of the proms on Saturday. A number of sporting fixtures also cancelled, including an English cricket test match. There'll be a minute's silence at the US Open Tennis Championships in New York, we're told. And of course, MPs will have a chance to make their tributes in the House of Commons. And of course, tributes, Christian, are obviously going to flow all week. People want to share their stories, their memories, and to mark this historic moment. And of course, the focus will very much be on Buckingham Palace for people to come and gather and expect an awful lot of flowers to be laid.
I imagine so, and those flowers already accumulating outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, as they will at Windsor as well, the two focal points, I think, for this period of national mourning. Also, the palaces in Scotland as well, of course, where, as you say, she will lie in rest today. Emma Simpson, thank you very much indeed. I should just mention that we have been told that the House of Commons will sit on Saturday. It has only sat on a Saturday 5 times since the 1930s on very important occasions. The invasion of the Falkland Islands, Suez Canal crisis, the outbreak of World War II. So a very important event, and of course all MPs and the new Prime Minister will want to pay their respects on that occasion. Well, during her long reign, the Queen was served by 15 Prime Ministers, 11 Conservative and 4 Labour, from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss. Our political editor, Chris Mason, looks back at the premiers who were in office for the 7 decades of the Queen's reign.
The state opening of Parliament, pageantry, tradition, continuity, the connection between the head of state and democracy. As a constitutional monarch, Queen Elizabeth could not direct government policy. When MPs are summoned to attend the royal speech, the door to the Commons is ceremonially slammed in the face of the official sent to fetch them, underlining the elected chamber's independence.
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this Honourable House to attend Her Majesty as the House of Peers immediately.
Legislation will be introduced to counter hostile activity by foreign states.
For decade after decade, the face and the voice of the Queen, even though the words were not hers.
I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
They are written by the government. Her first Prime Minister was Sir Winston Churchill. As a young princess, she had celebrated VE Day alongside him. She was hugely fond of him, and the man who'd fought for her great-great-grandmother during the Boer War was proudly, even paternally protective of the new young Queen.
I, whose youth was passed in the august, unchallenged and tranquil glories of the Victorian era, may well feel a thrill in invoking once more the prayer and the anthem. God save the Queen.
And now upon the shoulders of Sir Anthony falls the role of the Queen's First Minister.
Next, it was Anthony Eden. His decision to use military force in 1956, after the leader of Egypt had nationalised the Suez Canal, brought humiliation and his own downfall. The UK was not the world power it was.
The comings and goings at the palace are watched with mounting excitement. Who is being called for advice and who to be offered leadership?
In the early days of her reign, the Conservatives had no mechanism for electing new leaders. Harold Macmillan was simply said to have emerged as Eden's successor. Potentially, it put the Queen in the uncomfortable position of having to choose between political rivals, and in 1963, some were surprised when Macmillan resigned, and Her Majesty sent for Alec Douglas Hume, then still a member of the House of Lords.
In the Tory party, no choice would have been unanimously approved. But perhaps when the tumult subsides, Lord Hume will be a popular Premier.
The Britain that is going to be forged in the white heat of this revolution will be no place for restrictive practices.
Harold Wilson was the Queen's first Labour Prime Minister and hugely valued his weekly meetings with her.
The fact that there is somebody different, separate, uncommitted, whose only concern is to see that Parliament and government reflect the decision of her people. That is something that one just doesn't have in presidential states.
I mean, he is master of his own situation, isn't he?
Key to the monarch's role being kept in touch with what the government was planning, to offer guidance and, if necessary, warning. Edward Heath said he found her experience invaluable. And Jim Callaghan sometimes, although not always successfully, sought her advice.
So I recall one occasion when I was perplexed about a particular problem, And I explained it to her, and I said, you know, I really don't know what to do about this. What would you do? And she looked at me with a twinkle in her eye and said, that's what you're paid for.
The Queen's own views were articulated in public very, very rarely indeed. And when they were, the words selected judiciously to avoid direct criticism. Take this speech to Parliament, as Callaghan's government considered handing more power to Scotland.
I number kings and queens of England and of Scotland, and princes of Wales among my ancestors. And so I can readily understand these aspirations. But I cannot forget that I was crowned Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
When Margaret Thatcher became the UK's first woman to be Prime Minister, it was reported the Queen had suggested privately she was uncaring.
Even if she did say it, all right, she may have felt something, but there was never any difficulty in saying anything to me. Any difficulty at all.
As head of state, Her Majesty had regular access to the world's most powerful leaders, and successive prime ministers recognised how valuable that soft power was.
The feeling in Moscow in the period I was there was just astonishing. It was actually like living with history.
Tapping into her knowledge, assured of her complete discretion.
I have had quite a lot of prime ministers, and some stayed longer than others.
They were saying that it was...
they unburden themselves, or they tell me what's going on, or if they've got any problems. And sometimes one can help in that way too.
A new dawn has broken.
As Tony Blair's New Labour swept into power, political change, constitutional continuity, like the royal invitation to Balmoral.
You've just been having tea, have you?
Yes, I've just had tea with Prince Charles. It was very nice.
Where the monarch and the head of her government could talk about matters of state, but also have a barbecue and share the washing up.
It was odd to get used to, as it were, that here was all these people you've grown up with as the royal family and the Queen fussing around you and looking after you, and took a little bit of getting used to.
And there were hours of government paperwork, full of the details of everything from international financial upheaval to an independence referendum in Scotland, about which she asked voters to think carefully, leaving the European Union, to a worldwide coronavirus pandemic and a cost of living crisis.
Good afternoon.
Continuity at times of political change. 15 prime ministers, different people of different parties from different ages. For 7 decades, the Queen worked with them all, at the heart of democracy, yet detached from it, providing advice, encouragement, counsel, continuity, and ever present for so long in a world of continuous change.
Chris Mason, our political editor, 15 prime ministers and 5 of them born after she came to the throne. In June, the nation celebrated Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years on the throne. It is a landmark that no other British monarch has ever reached. Our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, looks back.
The sun shone and crowds filled the Mall. For 4 days in June, the message could not have been clearer.
God save the Queen!
A galaxy of rock royalty, and the British people in their thousands celebrating a reign etched so deeply in our memories.
Your Majesty, Mummy, you have been there for us for these 70 years. These pictures on your house are the story of your life and ours.
And listen to the reaction of this delighted and grateful crowd.
The Queen's appearances were brief but unforgettable.
Oh, that's wonderful.
On the first day, her delight both at the sight and sound of so many people and the antics of her great-grandson were obvious. That evening, Her Majesty lit the first of a giant chain of beacons, symbols of hope in 2,500 towns and cities from Shetland to Australia and New Zealand.
What a wonderful sound those bells can be heard all over the City of London.
The next morning, the bells of St Paul's marked the national service of Thanksgiving, the surrounding pavements packed with well-wishers.
We'll never see this again in our lifetime, so it's really a special day for us, yeah.
Absolutely magical atmosphere. We're enjoying every second.
This was the largest gathering of royals since before the pandemic. Almost all the members of her family were there, but not the Queen. She was unable to attend in person, but watched the service from home.
Thank you for showing us how service and faithfulness matter.
This is English champagne, especially for the Queen.
The thank yous continued at tens of thousands of Jubilee lunches, bringing communities together, something the Queen had done throughout her reign.
We talk about it, love. We talk about it, love.
At the Platinum Party at the Palace, a lineup of legends. Each with their own memory of Britain's longest reign.
And I've grown up with this woman. You know, I was 7 when she came to the throne. So she's always been part of my life.
Around the Olympics, she was absolutely essential. When some of the selection panel come through the city, she hosted them at Buckingham Palace on a Friday night and even appeared on the balcony and waved them goodbye. So it sort of put Paris and Madrid in its place.
Yes. I do hope you're having a lovely Jubilee.
To those memories, she added
tea?
2 more.
Oh, yes, please.
Stealing the show with Paddington.
A wave from Her Majesty to acknowledge the wave of love that is surely coming across that balcony and sweeping its way through the palace.
And bringing events to a close on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, surrounded by her family, including her 3 heirs. A wonderful 4-day party was officially over. But what a Platinum Jubilee it had been.
Sarah Campbell reporting. Well, Queen Elizabeth came to the throne at the age of 25, and during her long reign she witnessed momentous social and economic change in Britain and throughout the Commonwealth. Her Majesty's death concludes a major chapter of British history, a chapter that opened at the midpoint of the 20th century as Britain emerged from the years of the Second World War. Nicholas Witchell presents the account of the Queen's long life.
I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted Queen. Is your Majesty willing to take the oath?
She was 27 when she took the coronation oath.
I solemnly promise so to do.
She was anointed, blessed and consecrated. She took possession of a 1,200-year-old throne. She knew that it was a role from which only death could release her, and yet when she was born, no one had thought that it would be her destiny. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born on the 21st of April 1926. She was the first child of the then King's second son, the Duke of York. This was the young Princess Elizabeth at the age of 4, visiting a photographic studio in London. Her life then was comparatively carefree. It was the abdication in 1936 of her uncle, King Edward VIII, that unexpectedly placed Elizabeth in direct line to the throne.
Well, a very good morning. Many thanks for keeping it Citizen TV. This is another edition of Daybreak on this 9th day of September 2022. My name is Wahiga Mwaura, sitting in for Trevor Ombija. Many thanks for making time for us today. Let me immediately direct you to the front page of our dailies this morning. We can start with the Daily Nation. And of course, 3 words make up that headline, or should I say names: Queen Elizabeth II. And, you know, her date of birth, 1926, until when she breathed her last yesterday, in the year 2022. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, who rose to the throne while on tour in Kenya after the death of her father, died yesterday at the Balmoral Castle. This is in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. She was 96, leading the monarchy for 70 years and 214 days from the final years of the British Empire into the age of social media. Now, she became one of the world's most recognized and respected figures, and her death not only brings to an end the longest reign in the history of the UK, but pulls down the curtains on one of the longest reigns by any head of state in the world. That's what you'll find on the front page of the Daily Nation. And a similar headline on the front page of the Standard. But this time around, they go with the 4 words, "The Queen is dead," with the little caption down there saying Britain's longest-serving monarch has died, age 96, after she reigned for 70 years. Still hard to believe. The world's second longest running monarch, Britain's longest reigning monarch. And yesterday her family had gathered at her estate in Balmoral after concerns grew about her health. And of course, we have other stories as well. Wetangula Kingi, new speakers of parliament. A quote there by Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka, the Wiper Party leader, why I quit the Senate race. And I guess that appropriate to discuss those topics and so much more as well. Let me introduce them to you at this time. Joining me in studio, we have Honorable Robert Mbui, Member of Parliament, Kadhiani, and of course, Wiper Organizing Secretary. Honorable Mbui, thank you for making time. I know you had a busy day yesterday. Karibu sana. And next to him, Honorable Martha Wangari, who's the MP Gilgil. Welcome to the program as well.
Thank you, Wahiga.
And Martha, let me start with you. I want to give you a chance to react to the front page of both papers. I believe you were in Parliament yesterday when the news began to trickle in that the Queen has passed on.
Yeah.
Any message you'd like to pass along at this time?
I think I'll just join other leaders to condole with the Queen's family. And I think she's been blessed. I mean, she's reigned for 70 years. She's been the active Queen not only for the UK, she's been the active Queen for New Zealand, for Australia. We have areas where she still has reigned, other 8 countries. So she's been really blessed. And I think the relationship between this specific Queen with Kenya dates all the way to 1952. Well, I know it was a complicated time for Kenya that time, but she came in for holiday as a princess, left as a queen. So I think the history dates all the way back. And of course, the leadership of the Commonwealth. So she has a whole book, I would think maybe volumes.
Several books.
Several volumes to be dedicated to her. Of course, the good, the ugly, of course, has been also dodged with controversies. But at this point, I think we only just wish to say rest in peace. And I think it's an end of an era, really. It's an end of an era.
I had one commentator describe it as a mixed legacy, depending on how her kingdom touched you.
Yes.
But by and large, I think the world is celebrating her. And Honorable Robert Mbui, I don't know if you have any similar thoughts on the same.
Yeah, mine, I'm African, so I will not mention the bad, but I think I just want to condole also with the family and also the people of Great Britain because of, losing the Queen. Maybe when you think about it, you realize that we are a democratic country. And considering she's been reigning for so many years, 70 years, and yet from the West, we keep getting these stories of that the leadership has to be elected. I wonder whether this is...
Who elects the Queen?
So it's really an interesting mix and match when you see them having, democracy, and at the same time they have royalty. And And when they come here, they tell us, no, you people have to be democratic. So I don't know, maybe we need to consider in Kenya to have a king like Raila Amolo Odinga. Without having to go to elections because he deserves.
Start a monarchy.
You're already taking us to bring us back home even before we have properly thought through. Okay, Honorable Robert Mbui, thank you so much for that. And Honorable Martha Wangari, we were also expecting Eddie Oketch, who's the first-time Migori senator. As soon as he joins us, we will be able to bring him on. But Honorable Mbui, maybe I start with you on this one, because I see a quote by your party leader on the front page of the Standard. Kalonzo Musyoka, Wiper leader, is quoted as saying, "I was well guided by my party and Azimio top leadership after